The carriage rolled into the gravel drive at Wexford Hall 4 hours after dark, and Lord Carrick, who had not slept since Tuesday, climbed down before the steps had been let down and held out the folded paper without speaking. The Duke of Wexford had seen the lantern in the lodge and come down himself. He stood at the foot of the steps in a black greatcoat over evening dress, hat in hand, and looked at the paper without taking it. He was 27, taller than the lamplit footman by half a head, and broad across the shoulders in the way of men who had ridden their own land since boyhood. His face, in the carriage lamp, was the careful, unreadable face of a man who had already guessed. Wexford. Lord Carrick's hand shook. He pushed the paper forward. The vowel. I cannot meet it. Edmund Wexford glanced at the carriage. The door was still closed. A pale hand had moved behind the glass once, and was still.
Then we will speak inside, my lord. Come in. I cannot come in. Lord Carrick stepped back from the steps, as though the gravel had bitten him. He thrust the paper out again. Take it. Read it. I have brought what I have. She's in the carriage. She knows. I told her this morning. There was nothing else to be done. For a long beat, the Duke did not move. The lamps in the porte-cochere made a yellow road between him and the carriage door. He took the folded paper at last, opened it under the lantern, and read it once through. £15,000. Lord Augustus Pembury's broker as witness. Dated April of the last year. The hand was Carrick's. The figure had been entered after, in another ink, by another pen. This is Pembury's hand on the sum, the Duke said quietly. It is the sum I owe. It is what they will take if I do not pay it by Saturday. You came to me. I came to a gentleman. The other course is not a course. Lord Carrick's eyes shone in the lamplight. He was a small, grey-haired man in a travelling coat that had been good 10 years ago. She is 25. She is well-read. She speaks French and Italian. She is not what the offer makes her seem. I beg you. I am not asking what you think I am asking. I am asking for her keep. A roof. A name to set against the broker's letter. The Duke looked at the paper again. He did not look at the carriage. He folded the paper once, neatly, along the original crease. Stand back from the carriage, my lord. Lord Carrick took 2 steps back. Edmund Wexford turned to the iron lantern set into the gatepost. The candle inside was burning straight. He opened the small glass door of the lantern, held the folded paper to the flame at the corner, and waited until the wax of Pembury's seal cracked and ran down between his fingers, and the flame had taken the sheet. He shook it free and let what was left fall onto the gravel, and went on standing there until the last red edge had gone out. Then he closed the lantern. My lord, he said, without looking at Carrick, your vowel is paid. There is no debt at this house. Go to the kitchen. Mrs. Linley will give you supper. You will sleep in the green room tonight, and you will leave tomorrow with a letter from me that you will carry to your bank, and a second letter you will carry to Pembury. And that will be the end of it. He walked past Carrick to the carriage door and opened it himself. Inside, in the dim of the lamp, a young woman sat very upright, with her gloved hands folded over a small reticule in her lap. She wore a travelling dress of deep amber silk, plainer than fashion required, and a darker pelisse the colour of port wine. Her hair, where the lamp caught it, was the pale gold of a winter morning. Her grey eyes met his without flinching. She had been weeping at some point in the last 6 hours, but she was not weeping now. My lord. Her voice was low and very steady. Your father's note has been settled. It does not exist any longer. I am sorry that you were brought into a yard before you were told. She did not speak. You are tired, he said. You have travelled a long road. There are women in this house who will look after you. You are a guest here tonight. You will not be a guest after tonight, if you do not wish to be. There is no obligation that runs in either direction. Will you let me hand you down?" She looked at him for a moment more, as though to test the sentence for the lie that would be in any other man's mouth. She did not find it. She drew a slow breath and put her hand into his. He lifted her clear of the carriage step. She was light. She did not pretend to be lighter than she was. When her boots touched the gravel, she did not sway, and she did not look back at her father. "My name is Genevieve Carrick," she said. "Wexford," he answered, and offered his arm. "Come in out of the dark, Miss Carrick. There is a fire." She took it. The two of them went up the broad, shallow steps to the open doors of the hall, where the inner lamps were already lit, and Mrs. Limley, the housekeeper, stood with one hand pressed to her apron in the unmistakable posture of a woman who had been roused from her own supper to receive a guest she had not expected, and who had decided already, in the half-second before she curtsied, that she would receive the guest as though the guest had been expected since the morning. The hall at Wexford was a long stone room with 2 fires set at either end and a vaulted ceiling that took the light up into shadow. The floor was patterned in black and white marble. A long oak table ran down the center of it under a row of cut glass lamps. The arms of the house were carved over the inner doorway, 3 falcons on a field. The whole effect, by daylight, was austere. By lamplight, with a fire in either grate, it was warmer than its proportions would have suggested. Miss Carrick stopped just inside the threshold and looked once, briefly, at the falcons over the inner door, and then at Mrs. Linley. "Mrs. Linley," the Duke said, "this is Miss Carrick, who will be the house's guest tonight. The Rose Room, please. A tray, whatever Miss Carrick requires. Lord Carrick will be in the Green Room. There is a small matter of his supper, and a glass of brandy for his nightstand. He has had a long day." "Yes, my lord," Mrs. Linley said. "Mrs. Linley." "Yes, my lord." "Miss Carrick is a guest of the house. Not an inmate, not a patient. A guest. Will you be sure of it?" There was a small silence in which Mrs. Linley looked at Miss Carrick, at the steady grey eyes, at the amber silk, at the gloved hands clasped over the reticule. And Miss Carrick looked back at Mrs. Linley with the same level, undefended look she had used in the carriage. And something in Mrs. Linley's posture shifted by a hair's breadth. "My lord," the housekeeper said, "I shall be sure of it. Miss, will you come this way? The Rose Room is up the 2nd stair. The fire has been lit since 7 for one of the other rooms, and the maid has carried it up in a warming pan. It shall be in the grate before the kettle is on. Mind the marble, miss. It is uneven in 3 places between here and the 2nd stair. I shall walk in front of you and show you." "Thank you, Mrs. Linley," Miss Carrick said, very quietly. She did not look back at the Duke. He stood at the threshold of the hall and watched the housekeeper take Miss Carrick up the broad oak stair until the turn of the landing took them out of sight, and the small, precise sound of a young woman's heel on the 2nd tread carried back to him through the stone, and was the last sound in the hall before he closed the doors against the cold and went down the south corridor to his library. 3 hours later, the carriage was gone. Lord Carrick was asleep in the Green Room with a glass of brandy on the nightstand, and the Duke of Wexford was alone in the library that ran the south face of the house, and could not read a page. The fire in the hearth burned low and warm, copper light on the leather of the chair. He had sent Miss Carrick to the Rose Room with a maid and a tray. He had written, in the half-hour before the maids took the trays away, 2 letters. One to his banker in Lombard Street, instructing the deposit of £15,000 to Lord Augustus Pembury's account on the morning following its presentation, with a copy of the deposit notice to be sent to Lord Carrick at his Hertfordshire address. And one to Pembury himself, 3 lines only. "My Lord." Outside, the wind moved against the dark stone of the south wall. "The vowel, of which you held a copy, is settled. The original is destroyed. You will find no further occasion to mention it. Wexford." He had sealed both, and laid them on the salver for the morning post, and walked the length of the library twice with his hands behind his back. And now he sat at the writing table, with a glass of brandy he had not touched, and a folio of parliamentary papers open at a page he had read 4 times. Pembury's enclosure bill. The second reading was set for the 7th of November.
Edmund Wexford had spoken against it once already in the upper house, and meant to speak against it again. And Pembury had answered with the broker's letter in April, and then with a quiet word at the club in June about the late Duke's gambling losses. Edmund's father, 2 years gone now, had not been a careful man. And then in September, with the appointment to the Lord Lieutenancy that had gone unaccountably to a man no one had heard of. And now with the carriage at the gate. Edmund pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. He understood the move. He understood it as a chess player understands a move. Pembury had not loaned Carrick £15,000 in the hope of the money back. He had loaned it in the certainty of the default, knowing what Carrick had to offer in lieu, and knowing that the Duke who held the vow would be either a gentleman who took the offer, and was therefore ruinable by report, or a gentleman who refused the offer, and was therefore harbouring an unmarried young woman of a known indebted house, and was therefore equally ruinable by a different report. The difference between the two readings was a week of newspaper. He had walked into it because he could not have done otherwise. A gentleman did not turn a young woman onto a Berkshire road at 10 at night. He took the brandy at last. He did not taste it. A coal shifted in the grate. He looked up. The fire had burned down to the red, and the small clock on the mantel struck 2. And somewhere above him, in the house, Miss Carrick was either asleep or not asleep in a bed that was not her own. He thought of the steadiness with which she had said her name in the gravel. He thought of her grey eyes, which had not been the eyes of a frightened woman. He set down the brandy and walked to the window. The lawn ran down to the lake, and beyond the lake the woods of Weather Hill rose against the sky. Pembury wanted Weather Hill. Pembury had wanted Weather Hill for 8 years. The enclosure bill was the road to it. Edmund had known this for half a year and had not been able to put his finger on what Pembury would do to clear the road. And now he knew, and the knowing was not a comfort. He blew out the desk lamp and went up to bed, and lay a long time looking at the canopy, and was up before the morning postboy was at the gate. Miss Carrick came down to breakfast at 9:30, which the Duke had not expected, and stood in the doorway of the breakfast room until he set down his cup. Miss Carrick. He rose. Please, there is coffee. There is also tea, if you would prefer it. She wore a morning gown of soft russet wool, very plain, and her hair was done up simply, as a country girl might do it before church. She did not look like a woman who had slept easily, but she had slept. Her colour was better than the night before, and there was a small purpose in the way she held her hands. At 7, with your permission, I asked Mrs. Linley to send him with hot bricks for his feet. He had a long road ahead of him. Thank you. He carried 2 letters for me. One will reach Lord Pembury before the post coach. The other will reach my banker by tomorrow. The matter is closed, Miss Carrick, truly. She did not move from the doorway. My lord, may I ask you a question without offence? You may ask me anything in this house. You will get a true answer or no answer at all. Why? He waited. Why did you burn it in the lantern, instead of taking it inside and burning it in the grate? He considered this, with his hand still resting on the back of his chair. It was an honest question, and a sharper one than he had expected before 9 in the morning. Because the lantern was nearer, he said, and because I did not want a moment to pass between your father's hand and the fire in which the paper might be read by a second pair of eyes. I did not want a footman to see it. I did not want my own steward to see it. I did not want anyone in this house to be able to say, 2 years from now, that they had read the figure on it. So I burned it where I stood. She nodded slowly. Then I would like coffee, she said, if you please. He pulled out a chair for her himself. He had not done so for a woman not of his family in merely 3 years. My lord, she said when she had sat, I do not wish to remain in your house as a charge upon you. I have a cousin in Yorkshire, Mrs. Thomas Allen at Roughedale. I have written to her in the night. I will go to her as soon as a coach can be hired that does not put my father to further expense. I should like to be honest with you about this.
I came here yesterday because my father required it. I would not have come otherwise.
I had not supposed you would.
Good. Miss Carrick. Please call me Miss Carrick. Yes.
I shall not press you to remain, but it is a long journey to Yorkshire in the first week of November, and Mrs. Allen's reply will require 10 days at least to reach you. The roads from here to the north are passable. The roads from here to Yorkshire are passable until the first snow. I propose that you remain here as a guest of the house, without obligation, without anything, until your cousin's letter arrives. The Dowager Lady Margaret, my father's sister, may be persuaded to come from Bath as a chaperone. You will have your own apartments. The library is open to you. The horses are at your disposal. I shall not be in your way. He had not meant to say so much. She watched him over the rim of her cup, and her grey eyes were very level. "You will not be in my way," she said, a fraction more lightly than the sentence required. "I shall be in the South Library, writing parliamentary papers, Miss Carrick. I shall not be cheerful company." "I do not require cheerful company." "Then we are agreed." "On one further point, my lord." "Name it." "If I am to remain here 10 days as a guest of the house, I should like to be of use. I am not idle by habit. I keep my father's accounts. I've done so since I was 16. I know how to read a bill, and I know how to write a fair hand. I do not wish to spend 10 days sitting in a window with a piece of needlework I would not have chosen." He felt the corner of his mouth move against his will. Mrs. Linley would not say no to a second pair of eyes on the housekeeping book. The harvest accounts have been 3 weeks delayed by the rain. If you would like— "I should like." "Then it is yours." She set down her cup. Her hand was steady. She rose. She paused at the door. "I do not weep ordinarily. I was tired yesterday and frightened. You did not see me, and I am grateful for that. But I do not weep ordinarily, and I do not require to be handled. I have a hand of my own. If I should fall here, I should prefer to be lifted up. I should not prefer to be carried." "Understood," he said. She nodded once and went out, and he sat down again and looked at the cooling toast on his plate and did not eat it. For some time after she had gone, he did not move. The fire in the breakfast room grate had got down to a quiet red, and through the long window the south lawn lay under a wash of thin gold November light that had not yet touched the lake. A blackbird was on the wall of the parterre, very still, with its head turned at an angle, listening. He could hear the small clatter of Mrs. Linley below stairs, and the soft footfall of the maid Annie carrying the breakfast trays back along the corridor, and the closer, nearer sound of the chimney pulling the air through the room as the fire took the last of the kindling and went over to coal. It was a small, ordinary morning at Wexford. It was not, he thought, an ordinary morning at all. He stood up from the table at last and went to the long window and stood with his hands behind his back and looked out across the lawn. The lime walk on his right was bare. The trees had given up their last leaves in the storm of the previous week, and now the long branches were spare and very dark against the sky. Beyond the lawn, the lake was a flat plate of grey, ruffled only along the windward edge where the south breeze took it. He could see, in the field above the lake, the small, bent shape of one of the undergardeners cutting the last of the cabbages. He could see the smoke from the chimney of the south lodge climbing very straight in the cold air. He could see, in the distance, the wooded shoulder of Weather Hill rising against the further grey of the morning, and he thought, with a small, precise certainty that surprised him, that Miss Carrick's grandmother had walked that hill every August of a long life, and that Miss Carrick had walked it with her, and that he himself had not been on it in 4 years, and that this was, somehow, the single most important fact in the room. He turned from the window. He rang for the footman. He went to his library to write his post. For 3 days the house arranged itself around the fact of Miss Carrick. The Dowager Lady Margaret could not come from Bath until the end of the week. The road from Bath was washed in 2 places. So Mrs. Linley, the housekeeper,
made herself the chaperone in the meantime, with a grimness that was half disapproving and half pleased, for the Rose Room had not been opened to a guest since the late Duchess. The hall smelt of beeswax and old wood, and the dry sweetness of October. Edmund went to his library every morning at 8. Miss Carrick went to the housekeeper's parlour at 9 and stayed there until 11, and came back to the small sitting room with a folio of accounts under her arm. He saw her only at meals, and at meals he asked nothing of her she had not offered. Each morning the cold came up off the floor, and the fire was lit by 7:30. They spoke of the road from Hertfordshire, of the weather, of an etching of the Bridge of Sighs that hung above the mantel in the dining room. He asked her once whether she rode. She said she did, when she had a horse to ride. He sent word to the stable that the chestnut mare was to be saddled for her in the mornings. Her voice was quiet and even, her hands soft on the silk of her cuffs. On the third morning, the housekeeper came to him in the library before he had begun his post. It is the matter of the tallow, my lord." He set down his pen. She did not sit. She set the housekeeping book on his table with the care of a woman setting down a glass she had not yet decided whether to drop. "It is Miss Carrick, my lord. She has gone through the book since Tuesday. She has not said a word against me. She is the politest young woman I have spoken to since the late Duchess. But she has marked, my lord, 3 places where I have been charging the household at 2p a pound, and the chandler's bill records 3p halfpenny, and a 4th place where the chandler's man, that is Joseph, his nephew, my lord, you will not know him, where Joseph has been signing for an even quarter, and the kitchen book records a half. I have not been at fault, my lord. I do not falsify a book. But she is right that the chandler has been cheating us, and that Joseph has been cheating the chandler. And I did not see it, my lord, because I do not sit down with the chandler's bill side by side with my own book, as a young woman with quick eyes will sit down. I should have seen it. I am ashamed not to have seen it." He looked at the book. He did not open it. "How long has this been going on?" "Since Michaelmas, a year ago, my lord, by her reading. Perhaps £30 in all. It is not the figure. It is that I did not see it." "You are not at fault. The book is in your hand because I asked you to keep it. The chandler is at fault." "Yes, my lord." "Tell the chandler to come to the house this afternoon. Tell him to bring his ledger. We shall settle it this afternoon. And Mrs. Linley." "My lord." "Thank Miss Carrick for me. Not for the saving, for the kindness with which she spoke to you about it." The housekeeper inclined her head. "My lord, I shall. And, my lord." "Yes?" "She is a very steady young woman, my lord. She has a hand on her shoulder, if I may say it. The maids like her. They do not like everyone." "No," he said. "I imagine they do not." Mrs. Linley took the book and left, and Edmund Wexford sat at his table with the morning unopened in his hands, and considered that the chandler had been cheating him for a year, and that he had not noticed, because he had been writing speeches against an enclosure bill in the upper house, and had not had the patience for tallow. He sat at the table for perhaps 5 minutes more. The clock on the corner cabinet was a small French piece, gilt and enamel, which his mother had liked, and it ticked into the silence of the room with a precision that he had always found steadying. The post lay unopened beside his right hand. A bowl of late roses, cut from the south wall the day before by Mrs. Linley's own scissors, sat on the corner of the writing table. Their perfume, in the warmth of the room, had taken on an autumn weight, half rose and half hawthorn leaf turned. The morning light came in through the long window on his left, slanting across the table at the angle of late October. A yellow light, clean rather than warm, the colour of cured oak under varnish, and laid a square of brightness across the corner of the leather blotter and the edge of his sleeve. He thought of the steadiness in Mrs. Linley's voice when she had said, "I am ashamed not to have seen it." He thought of the careful way the housekeeper had set the housekeeping book on the table, the way of a woman who had not slept easily the night before either, and who had decided, perhaps without thinking the decision through, that whatever the Duke's eventual judgment turned out to be, the truth was to be in the room before anything else was. He thought of the young woman who had walked into this house 3 nights ago, in deep amber silk, with her gloved hands folded over a reticule, and who had now, in 3 days, opened a housekeeping book and found in it the small, steady theft that had been hidden inside it for 13 months. He had thought, when he had handed her down from the carriage, that he was doing her a small kindness, that the kindness would close around the moment of the gravel and the lantern, and would close it, and that the rest of the autumn would proceed without further disturbance. He saw now that he had been wrong about the direction of the kindness. He had been the one disturbed. He went down to the small sitting room. Miss Carrick was at the desk by the window, with a folio of plans open before her. She did not look up at once. When she did, her eyes had the focused, slightly distant look of a woman who had been reading something more interesting than she had expected to find.
Miss Carrick, Mrs. Linley has just been with me. Ah. You will not have meant her any embarrassment.
I did not. I had hoped only that I might mention it to her before I mentioned it to you, or that she might mention it to you herself, which would have been better.
She did mention it to me herself. She did so before I sat down to read it. That is why I am here.
Miss Carrick set the pen down. Her hand at the pen was slim and competent. There was a faint mark of ink on her second finger. My lord, I owe you an apology of my own. Those plans on the desk, they are not mine. I took them from a drawer. The drawer was unlocked. I should not have opened it. I was looking for a quill. He glanced at the plans. They were the Weather Hill survey of 1796, marked in pencil in his own hand.
What did you see in them? He said.
She hesitated.
Miss Carrick, the drawer was unlocked because I do not keep a single private paper in this house. If you saw something in those plans, please tell me. I shall not be offended.
I saw, she said slowly, that the boundary stone at the foot of Weather Hill is marked here in pencil, at the southeast corner of the field below the spinney. And I know, my lord, because my mother's family farmed in this county for 100 years before I was born, that the boundary stone at the foot of Weather Hill is in fact a 1/4 of a mile to the east of where it is marked here. There is a stone in the southeast corner of that field. It is not the boundary stone. It is an old waymark from the abbey, dated, I think, to the 14th century. The boundary stone is by the gate, 1/2 a mile from the spinney, on the road to the village. It is sunk into the ground at the foot of an oak. If you walk from the church, you cannot miss it.
He sat down in the chair opposite hers, very slowly. The boundary stone at the foot of Weather Hill is by the gate on the village road, not in the southeast corner of the field. The stone in the field is older and has nothing to do with the boundary. You are certain of this?
My lord, I have walked from that gate to that stone every August of my life. My grandmother lived in the parish of Wethercombe-Spinney until I was 14, and I spent every August with her until that year. And a 1/2 mile of difference at the foot of Weather Hill matters, my lord, because the line of the parish runs through the gate, and the field below the spinney sits inside the parish, if the stone is by the gate, and outside the parish, if the stone is in the field. There has been an argument about it since the Reformation. I remember my grandmother's pew rent being raised in 1803 over precisely that field. He did not speak. My lord, I did not know whose pencil was on the plan.
I do not know whether the pencil is wrong by mistake or
by design, he said quietly. My lord. He stood. He walked to the window. He looked down across the lawn and the lake to the woods rising on the hill, and the morning light on the leaves was the colour of beaten copper.
Miss Carrick, will you do me the kindness of staying in this room 10 minutes? I shall come back to it.
Of course, my lord. He went out. He went down the south corridor to his estate office and unlocked the cabinet at the back of the room and took out the folio of Pembury's enclosure bill and brought it back and laid it on the desk in front of her without a word. He pulled up a chair. She read it.
My lord,
she said after a moment. This clause assigns the boundary of the parish at the line marked on the survey of 1796. The survey of 1796 is the one with the pencil mark in the southeast corner of the field.
Yes.
The clause cites the survey by date and by surveyor's name.
Yes.
My lord, Lord Pembury's clause assigns Weather Hill to the parish of Pembury, and assigns the field below the spinney to the parish of Pembury, and assigns the wood between the spinney and the lake to the parish of Pembury, by citing a survey that is wrong by 1/4 mile.
Yes.
And the survey is wrong by 1/4 mile because someone has marked the boundary stone in the wrong place on it, in pencil.
Yes.
My lord, the pencil mark is in your hand. He sat very still.
It is not in my hand. It is a copy of my hand. It is not bad. It is good enough to pass under a glass at the lower bench of the Lords. I made my own marks on this plan in the spring of 1812, and they are in the upper left margin, and they are not in pencil. They are in ink.
My lord,
Miss Carrick, will you please come up the hill with me now? Forgive the lack of ceremony. There is a thaw in the air. The road will be hard underfoot for an hour more. I want you to show me the boundary stone. She was already on her feet.
My lord, I shall need an outdoor coat.
Mrs. Linley will have one for you. I shall send for the horses.
There is no need to send for horses. I should rather walk.
Then we shall walk. They went up the village road in silence for the first 1/4 mile, with Mrs. Linley a careful 20 paces behind them in a stout grey pelisse, and the second housemaid behind her, because Mrs. Linley was not to be persuaded that the Duke and Miss Carrick should walk a mile of public road alone. The morning was bright and cold. The hedges were stripped to the bone. The bracken on the lower slopes was the deep red of dried copper, and the air smelled of wet beech leaf and chimney smoke from the cottages by the brook. At the gate by the oak, Miss Carrick stopped. She knelt without speaking. She put her gloved hand on the moss at the base of the gatepost and parted it, and there, set into the earth, was a flat grey stone, perhaps a foot across, with a worn cross cut into it, and the letters W and P weathered nearly out.
Weather and Pembury, she said. Mark and parish. My lord, this is the stone.
He knelt beside her. He drew off his glove and laid his palm on the stone. It was cold and gritty under his hand. In the field there is a stone, half again as large with no cross. My grandmother used to call it the friar's seat. The boys of the parish were birched for sitting on it once, by the curate, before the war.
Show me.
They went into the field. They walked through the wet grass for 200 yards, and there, in the southeast corner of the field, half buried under bramble, was a great, unmarked stone, twice the size of the marker by the gate. He pulled the bramble away with his bare hand and looked at the surface of the stone. There was no cross. There were no letters. There was, on the far side, what looked like the shadow of a worn date, perhaps 1390-something, perhaps 1400. The stone was nothing to do with the parish. He stood up. You have just shown me that the enclosure bill that will come before the upper house on the 7th of November is built on a survey deliberately mismarked by 1/4 mile, and that the deliberate mismark has been drawn in a hand that imitates mine. If I had not known to look, and I would not have known to look, Miss Carrick, because I have not been in this parish in 4 years, and I have not walked this road since I was a boy, the bill would have passed. Weather Hill would have gone to Pembury at the second reading, and the wood would have been enclosed within the year, and the cottages by the brook would have lost their pasture before the spring.
Yes, my lord.
You have just saved 22 families on this land from being driven off it before Easter. She looked at the bramble. She did not look at him.
My lord, I have shown you a stone.
You have shown me a great many things. She did not answer. She drew her gloved hand back into her pelisse. He saw then that her grey eyes had something of moisture in them, and that she was determined that it should not fall. and he had the good sense to look away across the field at the line of the hill. "Miss Garrick, there is brandy in my flask. It is for cold mornings, not for ladies. I do not offer it. I mention it only that you should know I have one. Mrs. Linley is coming up the field with what I am sure she would call a sensible flask of her own. May I send her to you?" "My lord," she said, with a hint of her own dryness for the first time, "you are the only man in 3 days who has not tried to manage me. I should be obliged if you would not begin now." "Understood." "But," she said, "I should like Mrs. Linley to come up presently, with a sensible flask." He smiled. He had not, he thought, smiled in 7 weeks. "At once," he said, and turned, and went down the field to fetch the housekeeper. He went down the slope at an even pace, with his hat in his hand and the air cold on the back of his neck. Mrs. Linley met him at the gate with the sensible flask in one hand and the second housemaid 2 paces behind her, and she nodded and went up into the field without asking him a single question. The Duke stood at the gate beside the marked stone and watched the housekeeper kneel down beside Miss Carrick under the bramble and put the flask into Miss Carrick's gloved hand. He saw the housemaid spread a handkerchief on the wet grass. He saw Miss Carrick, very briefly, lean her shoulder against Mrs. Linley's shoulder, and saw also that Mrs. Linley did not look surprised by it. He turned away from the field then, and laid his palm again on the flat grey stone in the moss, and stood until the cold of it had gone into the heel of his hand. Then he walked alone down the village road, in the bright, cold morning, between hedges stripped of their leaves, with the smell of wood smoke from the cottages by the brook coming up on the small wind. He thought, as he walked, about Lord Augustus Pembury's hand in the survey of 1796. He thought about the 4 years he himself had not been in this parish. He thought about a small grey-haired man in a travelling coat that had been good 10 years ago, who had stood on the gravel 2 nights since and held out a folded paper with hands that shook. He thought about a young woman who had said her own name in the lamplight as though to a stranger. He did not yet know how all 4 of those things were one thing. He knew only that they were one thing, and that he was, for the first time in 8 months, no longer fighting Pembury's enclosure bill alone. The candle burned warm on the desk. His fingers rested on the cold rim of the inkstand. At the gate of the home park, the south wind off the lake had taken the last leaves out of the lower lime walk. The bracken on the slope above the path was the colour of an old copper kettle. A pair of partridge rose out of the long grass on his right, and went away, whirring over the wall toward the spinney, and he stood and watched them until they were lost in the trees. Then he walked into the home park and back to the house, and sent word to his agent in London that he wished a meeting with Mr. Coke at the Lombard Street Bank within the week, and went to his estate office, and worked until the dinner bell. Wind came in across the field, sharp and bright with the smell of wet earth. The Dowager Lady Margaret Wexford arrived from Bath the following evening, 2 days early, in a carriage and 4 with 3 trunks and a personal maid, and the air of a woman who had been told something which she did not like, and had ridden through bad weather to be told the rest of it in her own time. She was 62, and very straight-backed, with white hair drawn into a severe knot, and the same hazel eyes as her nephew. She wore black, as she had worn black since her husband's death in 1801. She kissed Edmund's cheek at the steps, looked at him for 1 beat longer than was friendly, and walked past him into the hall. At supper in the small dining room, Mrs. Linley has been with her. Has she? Aunt Edmund, we shall not have this conversation in the hall. Send Mrs. Linley to my room with a tray. I shall be down at 10. I shall see the young woman then. You will sit with us. I shall not eat in this house tonight. She climbed the stairs without looking back at him. He stood at the foot of the stairs with his hand on the newel post and counted to 7. At 10 o'clock, in the small drawing-room that gave onto the garden, the Dowager Lady Margaret sat in the chair by the fire, in her travelling gown of black bombazine and a small lace cap, and Miss Carrick sat in the chair opposite. Mrs. Linley had been sent away.
Edmund stood at the mantel and held his hands behind his back.
You came to this house 3 nights ago.
I did, madam.
You came as your father's offering against a sum of money he could not pay.
I did, madam.
You came knowing the nature of the offering.
I knew the nature of the offering, madam.
You came in any case.
I came because my father required it, madam, and because I would not have left him to the broker's letter alone.
The dowager studied her for a long moment.
Her hands were folded in her lap over a small piece of black silkwork which she had not lifted.
Edmund tells me that on the same night the Val was burned in the gatepost lantern.
It was burned, madam.
And that he has paid the sum to your father's creditor on your father's behalf.
He has, madam.
And that you have been 3 days in this house unchaperoned but for a housekeeper. And that yesterday you went up the village road with my nephew and his housekeeper to look at a stone.
I did, madam.
And that the stone, when you found it, made my nephew very thoughtful for 2 hours afterwards.
Miss Carrick was silent.
I am not, as you may have heard, a soft woman. I have known the world since before your father was born. I am here because Edmund's mother, whom I loved, would have come from Bath at a gallop the night the carriage stood at the gate, and Edmund's mother has been 6 years in her grave at Wethercombe Spinney, and I am the next nearest thing to her in this family, and I will not see her son's name in a broadsheet in November because his judgment failed him in October.
Edmund opened his mouth.
I am speaking to Miss Carrick, Edmund.
He closed it.
Madam, Miss Carrick said, I do not wish your nephew's name to appear in a broadsheet either. You will accept that, in the world, the appearance of a thing is not always the thing.
I accept it, madam.
Then you will be guided, while you remain in this house, by me. I shall be guided by you, madam, on every matter except one.
The dowager raised one fine grey eyebrow.
On the matter of when I leave this house, madam. I have written to my cousin in Yorkshire, Mrs. Allen, at Roughedale. I am waiting for her reply. When her letter comes, I shall go. I do not wish to remain in this house under your nephew's roof beyond the day on which it is safe to leave.
Safe to leave, the dowager said.
The roads, madam, to Yorkshire, in November.
Ah.
In all other things, madam, I shall be guided by you. I shall not ride with the Duke alone. I shall not walk in the gardens alone with the Duke. I shall not be at table with the Duke without you or Mrs. Linley present. I shall not speak to the Duke's steward except in your hearing. I shall keep to the Rose Room and the small sitting room and the library I shall use only at hours when the Duke is at the magistracy or on the estate. I shall not seek any conversation with the Duke that you have not first heard the beginning of. Will that suit you, madam?
There was a long pause.
The dowager picked up her silkwork and made a single small stitch in it and laid it down again. You will be at the magistracy from 10 until 3 on Wednesday.
Yes, aunt.
And on Friday.
Yes, aunt.
Good. Miss Carrick will work in the library on Wednesday and Friday in the morning, with Mrs. Linley present, on the matter of the housekeeping book. I shall not have her trapped at a window with a piece of needlework she would not have chosen. Did I say that correctly, Miss Carrick?
Madam, you said it precisely.
The dowager smiled. The smallest smile, but a smile. I thought I had it from Mrs. Linley. Good night, Miss Carrick.
Good night, madam.
Miss Carrick rose. She curtsied. She withdrew. The door closed behind her. Edmund stood at the mantel. The fire cracked. He sat down. Edmund. That young woman is the most honest creature I have spoken to in 15 years of London drawing rooms. She is also a young woman of high ability and quick understanding, and a hand on her shoulder, as Mrs. Linley says. And she has been delivered to your gate in the worst possible posture for the world's reading. She is also, Edmund, a young woman who has fallen, half, in love with you in 3 days, and who would die before she would say so, and who has just promised me a code of behavior designed to prevent any further falling. Do you understand? He did not speak. Then you will do nothing to put her in a worse posture in the world's reading than she already stands in. You will write your speech against Pembury's bill. You will go to your magistracy. You will dine in your dining room. You will be civil to her at meals, and you will not be alone with her for more than 3 minutes by any clock in this house. You will let her go to her cousin in Yorkshire as soon as Mrs. Allen's letter arrives. If, when she is in Yorkshire, you find yourself unable to bear it, then, Edmund, you will ride to Yorkshire in March with a ring in your pocket and an offer that the world will read as honourable, and you will let her say no to you in the open air, and you will accept it like a man if she says no, and you will marry someone of my choosing if she does not. Do you understand? He looked at the fire for a long time. She rose. She picked up her silkwork. She paused at the door. The matter of the stone. You will tell me at breakfast tomorrow. I shall. She went out. He sat by the fire until the coals were grey, and did not move. The wind had got up from the southwest. It pressed at the long windows of the drawing room and rattled the iron of the gutters along the south face of the house. The candles in the candelabra on the chimney-piece guttered once and steadied. The clock on the corner cabinet struck 3/4, and then 4. He listened to the small, precise sounds of his own house at the late hour. A kitchen door closed below stairs, the footman locking the side door of the south corridor, a single owl on the lawn, and he thought about what his aunt had said and what she had not said. The fire had burned down to copper coals. The warm air pressed close against the leather chair. She had not, in any of it, asked him whether he was in love with Miss Carrick. She had told him that Miss Carrick was half in love with him, and she had described the posture of the world's reading of the matter, and she had set a code of conduct for the next 10 days, and she had, at the end, named the conditions on which he might, in March, be permitted to follow Miss Carrick to Yorkshire with a question. She had not asked him for his own feeling. She had not, he thought, needed to ask. She had observed him handing the brandy at supper. She had observed him looking, or, more precisely, not looking, at the door of the small dining room when Miss Carrick withdrew. She had observed him, perhaps even, in the half-second when he had failed to answer her question the first time. The Dowager Lady Margaret Wexford had been in London drawing-rooms for 40 years. She was not a woman who needed a sentence spelled out where a silence would do. He thought, then, about Genevieve Carrick at the gate of the field that morning, kneeling in the wet moss with one gloved hand on the boundary stone of her grandmother's parish, and the way she had said weather and Pembury, Mark and parish. He thought about the small, unguarded movement of her shoulder, 50 yards up the field, against the shoulder of his housekeeper. He thought about the determined way she had not wept in the gravel 3 nights since, and the way her grey eyes had not been the eyes of a frightened woman. He thought about her sentence at the breakfast table the next morning. I do not require to be carried. And he understood, sitting by the low ash of the fire in the drawing-room at 4 in the morning, that she had spoken that sentence, not because she did not wish to be carried, but because she had already begun to suspect that she did wish it, of him, and that the wishing was the thing she did not wish to permit herself. He stood up. He took the screen from the fire and laid the coals over with ash and put out the candles one by one. He went up to bed. He did not sleep until very nearly 6. For the next 10 days, the house ran on a schedule that the Dowager set with a precision that would not have shamed the Lord Chamberlain. Miss Carrick took breakfast in the Rose Room with a tray. She came down at 9:30 to the library, where Mrs. Frost lay bright on the stone steps each morning, and the fires were lit before dawn. Linley sat with her sewing in the window seat, and where she worked at the long table on the housekeeping book, the harvest accounts, the steward's quarterly summary, and, at her own quiet request, granted by the Dowager only after 2 days of polite negotiation, the Weatherhill papers. The Duke was at the magistracy on Wednesday and Friday, and at his estate office every morning, and was not in the library while Miss Carrick was there. They met at luncheon and at dinner, with the Dowager between them at the table. At luncheon on the 4th day, Miss Carrick said, "My lord, I have been through the harvest accounts. The yield on the south fields is 16% down on last year. but the steward has compared with 1811, which was a poor year for wheat. If you compare with 1812, the yield is steady. The steward is not at fault. The comparison is. Thank you, Miss Garrick. I have also been through the housekeeping book to Michaelmas. The chandler has paid back £22. Mrs. Limley has had Joseph dismissed. There's been no further difficulty. Thank you, Miss Garrick. I have read the survey of 1796 and the survey of 1768. The 1768 survey marks the boundary stone correctly. The 1796 survey marks it incorrectly. There are 3 other places on the 1796 survey where the marks have been made in pencil rather than in ink, and where the ink alongside disagrees with the pencil. I have copied out the 3 other places on a separate sheet. With your permission, I shall bring it to the dining room after dinner. Thank you, Miss Garrick. It is in the dining room already, my lord. I gave it to your aunt at breakfast. The dowager, between them, ate a piece of bread without looking up. I did, madam. I thought it might interest you. It did. I shall return it to you after dinner with my own marks. There is one place on the West Hampton field, you will not have known, where the late Duke, my brother, had cause to look at the boundary in 1803. He came in from the field one September afternoon with mud on his boots and his inkstand under one arm, and made a mark on the 1796 survey himself, in ink, that he did not, afterwards, copy onto the master. The mark on West Hampton is his. I cannot say so in court. I can say so to you, in this dining room. Thank you, madam, said Miss Carrick, and ate a piece of bread without looking up. Edmund looked between the two of them. You have, he said, been discussing my parliamentary papers at breakfast. We have, Edmund, said his aunt, while you have been at your magistracy. In what spirit? In a spirit of disagreement, said the dowager. She thinks the brief should be presented to Lord Grey before the 7th of November. I think it should be presented at the bench of the second reading. We have come to an agreement. The brief will be presented to Lord Grey 1 week before the 7th of November, with a covering note from you that is, Edmund, Miss Carrick's phrase, short of the colour of accusation. That is to say, the brief will lay out the facts of the 4 mismarked places, without naming Lord Pembury's hand in any of them. Lord Grey will draw his own conclusions. You will not draw them for him in print. If Lord Pembury wishes to volunteer his hand in them, that is his business. And Miss Carrick will write the covering note. Miss Carrick will draft the covering note. You will sign it, you may amend it. I should be very surprised if you find much to amend. Aunt, Edmund, you have been writing this speech in the library for 6 weeks. It is angry, it is correct. It will not persuade a single man in the upper house who has not already made up his mind. You have stopped persuading and started indicting. The brief, with Miss Carrick's note, will persuade. Lord Grey is an old man and a careful one. He likes a fact. He does not like a duke who is angry. Miss Carrick has read your speech. You read my speech, he said to Miss Carrick. Madam directed me to it, my lord. I should not have read it otherwise. And? My lord, I think it is a fine speech for a man who has decided he has lost. It is not, I think, a fine speech for a man who means to win. There was a silence at the table. He set down his glass. Miss Carrick, will you write the note? I shall write the note, my lord, with madam's reading of every line. Thank you. My lord. He looked at his aunt. His aunt looked back at him, and did not smile, and ate the rest of her bread. The work on the brief itself was done at the long table in the South Library, in the 4 afternoons that followed. The dowager sat at the head of the table, with her silk work and a glass of Madeira within reach. Miss Carrick sat at the long side of the table, with the survey of 1796 and the survey of 1768 unrolled side by side under brass weights, and 4 sheets of foolscap in her own neat hand, on which the 4 mismarked places were listed, by clause and by parish. Edmund sat opposite her, with a glass of port, and the bound copy of Pembury's bill open at clauses 2, 3, 8, and 11. Mrs. Linley sat in the window with her sewing. It was an arrangement, the dowager had said with a small dryness over breakfast, that would have done credit to a cabinet committee, and was, she suspected, in better hands than most cabinet committees deserved. It became, in those 4 afternoons, the warmest room in the house. The fire was kept up. Mrs. Limley brought tea at 4 and sponge cake at 5. The light, through the long west windows, came in pale gold against the leather of the books on the south wall, and lay on the cream foolscap and the dark ink of Miss Carrick's hand, in a way that Edmund Wexford, at the corner of his eye, was not sure he had words for. They worked carefully. They did not raise their voices. The Dowager corrected 3 sentences of Miss Carrick's covering note in pencil, and Miss Carrick accepted 2 of them, and politely disputed the 3rd, on a fine point about the surveyor's commission and the date of his last fee, and the Dowager, after a pause, gave way on the 3rd with a nod that was almost a smile. Edmund struck out 3 paragraphs of his own draft of the speech for the upper house, replaced them with 3 sentences that Miss Carrick had suggested between 2 cups of tea, and laid the redrafted speech aside for the 7th of November, in case the bill still came back to him in some form he had not anticipated. The afternoon light fell warm across the leather of the desks, dust shifting in it. They did not, in those 4 afternoons, speak of Lord Pembury by name. They did not speak of the lantern at the gatepost. They did not speak of the carriage on the gravel. They spoke of clauses and surveys and parishes and parish maps, and they finished the brief on the evening of the 27th. Edmund signed the covering letter on the morning of the 28th at the writing table by the window in the South Library, with Miss Carrick standing 1/2 pace behind his right shoulder, and the Dowager standing on the hearthrug with the silkwork in her hand, and Mrs. Linley on the threshold of the library door, with a folded grey shawl over her arm, and the small, inward smile of a housekeeper who has watched something difficult come together on a sound footing. The brief and the note went to Lord Grey on the 28th of October by special messenger, in a sealed packet under Edmund's own seal, with a covering letter in Miss Carrick's hand that the Duke had read 3 times, and not amended a word of. It said only that a routine examination of the survey of 1796, undertaken by the household at Wexford Hall in the ordinary course of estate management, had disclosed 4 penciled marks on the survey that did not agree with the ink underneath, and that since the survey was cited by date and surveyor's name in clauses 2, 3, 8, and 11 of the enclosure bill before the upper house, his lordship would perhaps wish to have the discrepancies before him in advance of the second reading. The covering letter was a 1.5 pages long. It did not name Lord Pembury once. On the 31st of October, Lord Grey's reply arrived at Wexford Hall at 6:30 in the evening by a tired messenger on a tired horse, and the Duke read it, standing in the porte-cochere in the lantern light, and went straight to the small drawing-room where his aunt and Miss Carrick were at their usual evening employment of silk-work and reading by the fire. Lord Grey has acknowledged the brief. He has asked for the second reading to be deferred a fortnight, to allow the survey of 1768 to be re-examined by the upper house's own clerk. Pembury cannot prevent it. The bill is, for now, paused. The Dowager folded her silkwork and looked at the fire. Good. Sit down. Mrs. Linley will bring a glass of brandy. Miss Carrick, my dear, your work has answered. Miss Carrick did not lift her eyes from her reading. Madam, she said quietly, I am glad. The Dowager looked at her for a moment longer than she had looked at her in the previous 10 days. Yes, she said, I think you are. The thaw came in the first week of November, and the parterre on the south side of the house came out from under 3 days of frost into a damp green and brown that smelled of crushed thyme and wet box. On the morning of the 4th, the Duke walked the south parterre with a slip of paper in his hand from Lord Grey's secretary that said the clerk's examination had begun. Lady Margaret was at her writing desk in the morning room. Miss Carrick was in the library, working on the rent roll. He went to the library. Mrs. Linley was at her seat in the window. Will you walk in the south parterre this morning? The frost is gone. The time is out. I should like Miss Carrick to take the air. My aunt will join you in a quarter of an hour. Mrs. Linley rose and gathered her shawl and went out without speaking. Miss Carrick set down her pen. Miss Carrick, will you walk with me as far as the lower terrace?
My aunt will be a quarter of an hour. Mrs. Linley will be with us within 50 yards. Yes, my lord. They went out by the small door of the library to the gravel path that ran along the south face of the house. The morning sun was a thin, watery gold. The leaves of the lime walk had fallen in a wet brown carpet. The lake at the foot of the lawn was a flat slate. The woods of Weather Hill on the far side of the lake were bare and dark. For a few yards, they walked in silence.
I had a letter from your cousin, Mrs. Allen, at Roughdale yesterday.
Ah. It came with the second post. The Dowager has it. She has not given it to you because she wished me to mention it to you first. I see. Mrs. Allen will receive you on the 15th. She has had... The letter does not say so in so many words, but I gather she has had some difficulty with her own household, and a fortnight's delay would suit her better than an immediate arrival. She invites you to remain at Wexford until the morning of the 12th, and to make the journey north over the following 3 days with one of my own carriages, which she presumes upon me to lend. She is a sensible woman, your cousin. She is, my lord. You will go on the 12th. Yes, my lord. They walked a few more paces. Miss Carrick, I have been wanting to say something to you for 7 days, and have not said it because I promised my aunt I should not. Then perhaps, my lord, you should not say it. Perhaps not. I shall not say it then. I shall ask you a question instead. Genevieve. She did not break stride. Her face went pale and steady. Will you, when you are at Roughdale, accept a letter from me? She walked 3 paces before she answered. You have not promised your aunt not to write me a letter at Roughdale. I have not promised her not to write you a letter at Roughdale. Then yes, I shall accept a letter from you at Roughdale. I shall accept any letter from you at Roughdale. Genevieve. Yes. When the lilacs come out at Wexford, in the 2nd week of May, I shall come up the North Road in my own carriage, and I shall ask you something I have not asked you yet. She did not answer at once. Bring the lilacs. There are no lilacs at Roughdale. He laughed, surprised by it, by her, by the lightness of his own laughter on the cold air. She did not laugh, quite, but she looked at him sideways, and her grey eyes had the brightness of held water. Mrs. Linley is on the path, my lord, with my pelisse. I had forgotten my pelisse. She has been very kind. Mrs. Linley will be very kind for another 4 minutes, Miss Carrick, after which the Dowager will appear on the upper terrace. I shall be at my estate office at the end of the lime walk. I have a steward to speak to about the South Spinney. May I leave you to the Dowager? You may leave me to the Dowager, my lord. He bowed. He went down the lime walk. He did not look back at her. He did not see, therefore, that she watched him to the end of the avenue, and that her gloved hand pressed once, briefly, against the small piece of paper in the pocket of her gown, the slip from Lord Grey's secretary that he had given her in the morning at her work table, with the date of the clerk's examination written on it, and at the foot, in his own hand, 3 words: I am grateful. The next morning, the storm broke. The Morning Post came at 8, 3 hours late, with a small leather pouch from the Duke's London agent. Inside the pouch was a single broadsheet of the Courier of the previous evening, the early London edition of the 2nd of November, and pinned to the broadsheet was a folded sheet of plain paper in an unfamiliar hand. The Duke opened the pouch in the breakfast room at the head of the table, with Mrs. Linley clearing the tea things, and the Dowager at his right hand, and Miss Carrick at his left. The Dowager set down her cup at the sight of his face. He held out the broadsheet. It was open at the 4th page. There was a letter in the correspondence column, set in 3 close paragraphs of bold leaded type, signed at the foot with the name Henry Carrick, Bart. The body of the letter ran as follows. To the editor of the Courier. Sir, I write to confess a private debt to His Grace the Duke of Wexford, in which my family has lately been placed, and to record my gratitude for the singular generosity by which His Grace has,
in this difficult season, taken into his protection my unmarried daughter, Miss Genevieve Carrick, of age 25, presently a guest in His Grace's country seat. The arrangements between His Grace and my family in this matter are of a private nature, but the kindness of which my daughter has been the object, I am unable to leave unspoken in the public press. I have the honour to be, sir, yours obediently, Henry Carrick, Bart. The pinned note, in the unfamiliar hand, was 4 lines. My lord, this letter was placed with the courier yesterday, and 1 in the afternoon, by Lord Pembury's man of business, Mr. Greaves, who paid the editor 20 guineas for its insertion in the early edition, over the head of the editor's better judgment. Carrick himself is at Hertfordshire and knows nothing of it. The signature is a forgery. Your obedient servant, a friend at the courier. Edmund laid both papers face down on the table. She read them. She did not change colour. She laid them face down beside her own plate, and pressed her palm flat upon them as though to hold them to the table. You will not read these papers this morning. You will read them this afternoon. Now you will finish your breakfast. Edmund. Aunt, stand up. Walk with me to the morning room. We have a quarter of an hour. He stood. He walked. The dowager went ahead of him, through the door of the breakfast room. Miss Carrick remained at the table with a cup of tea grown cold in her hand, and the 2 folded papers on the cloth in front of her. After a moment, she set the cup down, and turned both papers over, and read them. She read them once. She read them again. She did not move for perhaps 3 minutes. Then she folded the broadsheet quietly along its original crease, and folded the pinned note inside it, and laid them on the salver where Mrs. Linley would collect them, and stood up, and went to the rose room. She rang for the housemaid. Annie, I should like the small leather portmanteau brought up from the box room. I shall not need the larger trunk. I shall be travelling in the morning. Miss? Tomorrow morning, Annie, early. The small leather portmanteau, please, and my second best pelisse. Yes, miss. When the door had closed, she sat down at the writing table by the window, with her hands flat on the wood, and she looked out at the south parterre with eyes that did not see the parterre, and she let herself, for the first time since she had come to the house, weep without sound for 1 full minute. And then she stopped, and dried her face, and took up her pen. She wrote 3 letters, 1 to her cousin Mrs. Allen at Roughedale, advising her arrival on the 13th, 2 days early, by hired post. 1 to her father at Hertfordshire, telling him she had read the letter that had been published in his name, and that she did not believe he had written it, and that she would write to him again from Yorkshire as soon as she was safely arrived. 1 to the Dowager Lady Margaret, 3 lines only, asking that on her departure from Wexford, no servant of the house be sent with her, no carriage of the house be lent to her, and no letter of recommendation be given on her behalf, for the protection of the house, and that all such matters should be charged to her own account, and that the account should be sent to her in Yorkshire in due course, and that she begged the dowager's pardon, and would not trouble the dowager again. She did not write a letter to the Duke. She sealed the 3 letters. She laid them on the writing table. She rang for Annie, gave her the letters for the morning post, and asked her to send Mrs. Linley to the rose room at her earliest convenience. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and waited. The window of the rose room looked east, over the line of the lime walk and the white frost still on the box hedges of the lower terrace. The morning sun was a thin disk behind a pearl-coloured sky. The frost made the grass beyond the parterre look as though a fine cloth had been laid down over the lawn in the small hours and forgotten. A robin was on the gravel path under her window, very intent on something between 2 stones. The fire in the rose room had been laid for an hour. There were 2 pillows of fine grey linen on the bed behind her, and a bowl of late chrysanthemums on the chimney-piece, and a small worked screen between the writing table and the door, and a piece of porcelain of a shepherdess that she had liked on her first afternoon, for the unforced kindness of its expression. None of these things were hers. She had been a guest in this room for 13 nights. She had borrowed a book from the library. She had borrowed a pelisse from Mrs. Linley. She had borrowed an inkstand from the writing table by the window.
She would leave the police folded, she thought, on the foot of the bed, and the book back in its place between the Cooper and the Tasso on the south shelf, and the inkstand exactly where she had found it, with the wafers beside it untouched. She would not, she thought, leave anything in this room that the Duke would have to look at later and account for. She would leave it as Mrs. Linley had given it. He had taken her in for a season's quiet usefulness, and now the usefulness was done. By 11 in the morning, the Dowager was in the morning room with Edmund and Mrs. Linley, and the door was closed, and the broadsheet was open on the table between them, and the pinned note from the courier lay beside it. The hot coffee on the side table sent its bitter scent through the warm room. "The signature is a forgery," Edmund said.
"It is. Pembury knows that we know it is."
"He does not care, Edmund. The letter is in the paper. Half the upper house will have read it by tonight. 3/4 of the lower house will have read it by tomorrow. Whether Pembury can be made to admit the forgery in print in a week's time will not matter. The impression will have been made. Miss Carrick will have been named in the courier as a private guest of yours of an unusually private nature." "What do you propose, Aunt?" The Dowager did not answer at once.
"There is one course in which the damage to Miss Carrick is contained. It is the course you will not like."
"Say it."
"You will announce, within the week, your engagement to your cousin, Catherine Wexford. Catherine is at Bath. She is the daughter of my late husband's brother. She is 23. She is well spoken. She is, I have ascertained in the last 2 days, agreeable to the match. The notice in the Gazette will close the courier letter. It'll be impossible for any rational reader to suppose that Miss Carrick, on her father's letter, has been any private guest of yours, since the Duke has plainly been negotiating his marriage with another lady through the same 6 weeks. Miss Carrick will go to Yorkshire on the 12th. Mrs. Allen will receive her. In due course, Mrs. Allen will find Miss Carrick a quiet place, a clergyman, a country gentleman, and she will be settled, and the matter will close."
"No."
"Edmund."
"No."
"Aunt." "There is no other course." "There is one other course, Aunt. There is the course in which I drive to London tomorrow morning at first light, and I find Lord Pembury in his own study, and I lay before him the 4 mismarked places on the survey of 1796, the imitation of my own pencil on his claws, the bribed letter in the courier signed in Henry Carrick's forged hand, and the broker's receipt for the original vowel of £15,000, dated the 11th of April of the last year. And I tell him that he will publish, before the 7th of November, in the Courier and the Morning Chronicle and the Gazette, a full retraction of the letter signed in Carrick's name, and a full withdrawal of clauses 2, 3, 8, and 11 of the enclosure bill. Or I will publish all of it myself, in those same papers, in his name, in mine, and at a price he will not survive. You will not survive it either, Edmund. You will be tainted. There will be a duke who is willing to be tainted in order to keep an honest woman from being slandered in print by her father's forged hand. There will be a duke who is not afraid of the courier. There will be a duke who is, when it is over, married to whom he chooses, with a clear name and a clear conscience, and Pembury will be silent in the upper house for the rest of his career. Edmund, Aunt, I shall do this." She did not speak at once. She looked at him for a long time, and her hazel eyes, the eyes of his father's sister, were not unkind, and they were not, finally, opposed. "We will not go to London tonight. You will go in the morning. You will speak first to Miss Carrick. You will tell her that the letter is a forgery, and that I have proposed to you the marriage with Catherine, and that you have refused it, and that you go to London to confront Pembury before the courier prints again. You will tell her that you will return on the 4th day. You will ask her, Edmund. You will ask her to delay her journey to Yorkshire by 4 days, no more, and to wait at Wexford until you return, and to give you her answer to a question you have not asked her yet, when you do return. Aunt. And if she will not delay, Edmund, you will let her go to Yorkshire on the 12th, and you will follow her there in March, with the courier retracted and the enclosure bill withdrawn. And you will ask the question in the open air at her cousin's gate, as I told you a fortnight ago, Do you hear me?
I hear you.
Good. Mrs. Linley, send Miss Carrick to me. Now, please.
Mrs. Linley went out. She came back 5 minutes later. Annie says Miss Carrick called for the small carriage at first light, madam. Annie says Miss Carrick was dressed and at the south door before 6. The carriage took her as far as the post coach at Reading. The post coach went north at 7:30. Annie says Miss Carrick paid for her own seat. Annie says, madam, that there are 3 letters for the Morning Post in the Rose Room writing table. One for Mrs. Allen at Roughedale. One for Sir Henry at Hertfordshire. One for you, madam. The dowager closed her eyes for one breath. She opened them. She read it. She set it on the table.
You will not now wait for the morning. You will leave for London inside the hour. You will not see her this morning. She is on the road to Roughedale. You will write to her at Roughedale tonight, from Pembury's own house, telling her exactly what you have done, and exactly what you have not done. You will sign it with your name, and not with your title. Tomorrow, by the Morning Post from London, the courier will retract. 3 days after that, you will follow her to Yorkshire. He stood at the table, with his hand pressed flat against the polished wood. Did she write to me at all? The dowager looked at the small heap of letters that Mrs. Linley had set on the table. There were 3. There was no 4th. He did not speak.
She left before she knew what she would do, Edmund. She left because she did not wish to make your choice harder than it was. She left to give you back your house. That is what the letter to me says. It is the letter of a woman who loves you. It is not the letter of a woman who has stopped loving you. There is a difference. You will hold to the difference. Now go to London. He went. He was in the saddle within 20 minutes. He was on the London road in half an hour, and the white frost was still on the hedges, and the sun was a low, cold disk in a flat sky, and the carriage that had carried Genevieve north had been on the post road for 3 hours already. He rode the first stage at a hard canter, on his own bay, with the wind from the southwest pulling at the brim of his hat, between hedges stripped to the bone, and ploughed fields the colour of dark slate. He changed horses at the Saracen's Head at 3 in the afternoon, and again at the Bell at Maidenhead at 5:30, and at the King's Arms at Slough at 7:30. And he rode into the lamps of Hyde Park Corner at 9:45, with the muscles of his thighs gone to wood, and the small of his back set in a long band of pain that he had felt before and would feel again. He did not stop for supper. He did not stop at his own townhouse. He stopped at his agent's house in Lincoln's Inn, where the lamps were still on at the front parlour, and the agent, a Mr. Hayworth of unmarried habits, who had been the Duke's father's man before the Duke's, met him at the door in a dressing gown, and listened to him for 10 minutes by the fire, and sent his clerk out into the night to wake 2 witnesses at Lincoln's Inn, and produced from an iron-bound box in his own study the sealed envelope that contained the photographed copy of the broker's receipt for the original vow, dated the 11th of April of the last year, that the Duke's banker in Lombard Street had taken before the original was paid. At 8 in the morning, Edmund slept 3 hours on a settle in Mr. Hayworth's parlour. At 11 he rose, washed in cold water, took coffee and a piece of bread, put on a fresh cravat from Mr. Hayworth's drawer that was rather tight, and at 3:30 in the afternoon he was at the door of Lord Pembury's house in Mayfair, with 2 grave men from Lincoln's Inn at his back, and a leather portfolio in his right hand. The footman who took his name did not recognize him. The footman who took his name did not, in any case, look at his face long enough to recognize him. He looked at the cut of the coat and the breeding of the horses behind him in the street, and went immediately for his master's secretary. Lord Pembury, in his Mayfair study at 4 in the afternoon, did not rise from his chair when his man announced the Duke of Wexford. He was a man of 42, fair-haired, fine-featured, dressed in pearl grey with a black satin cravat, a beautiful man, whom most women looked at twice before they spoke to him, and who had used that double look for 20 years. Edmund Wexford had ridden 110 miles since dawn. His boots were spattered to the knee with the mud of 3 counties. He did not sit. He set on Pembury's writing desk 3 things, in the order in which he wished Pembury to read them. First, the survey of 1796, with the 4 penciled marks circled in red ink in a hand that was plainly Genevieve Carrick's, and with the 4 corresponding ink marks beside them in a hand that was plainly the original surveyor's. Second, the broadsheet of the Courier of the 2nd of November, with the Henry Carrick Bart letter underlined in red, and pinned to it the note from the friend at the Courier, identifying Pembury's man Greaves as the bribe-bearer, and Carrick's signature as a forgery. Third, the broker's receipt for the original val of £15,000, dated April of the last year. The receipt that Pembury had thought destroyed when the val itself had burned in the gatepost lantern at Wexford Hall, and which was not, in fact, destroyed, because the Duke's banker in Lombard Street had photographed it onto a copy by the new method before it was paid, and the copy had been waiting in a Mayfair box for precisely this afternoon. Pembury looked at the 3 papers. He did not speak. You will write 3 things this afternoon at this desk. You will dictate them to your own clerk, and you will sign them in front of me and in front of 2 witnesses I have brought with me from Lincoln's Inn. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier, retracting in full the letter of the 2nd of November signed Henry Carrick Bart, and, acknowledging the letter as a forgery, multiple interdiction this particular in mother, without bratedly one thing, the Regent Carrick Bart, and acknowledging the letter as forgery, the letter Bludgeck of Crin, the letter 2, the Courier Proplums signed Henry Carrick. But then you will write 3 things that you will not write to the letter as per forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier, retracting the letter as a forgery, and acknowledging the letter as a forgery. It from 3 things that you will love to write, the forgery plays. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as a forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter, signed Henry Carrick, but forgery that you will bought the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as a forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter and acknowledging the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. The first thing you will write is a letter to the Courier retracting the letter as forgery. Bart, Henry Carrick, Bart, and well backs the main the scape of a learned part. Legacy note, which is the learned part, which is the brightness between my limit head, which from cursed is report the data embers that the chews will happen know, which was bless about the limpens mans, but they will be made partably generate, which was bless about the moment, which will love in one name stet that the choose will have a know, which was the gems really made fart the data ember. Hamry Carrick's mean, which was loved in the choose with first move, but first may be good. Chew is the gems that may be good. Into me, this should be loved into choose in the January staper of the learn part. This will Kirsten for me. May many persons' way is that when the data is diverse of the rive, and in the January they will go in. Maybe most partably in the choose with heart. If we weren't more the lumpens, and littered brings to the great age of the due naviously had lived down, it would do with a new choose. I have so January. But the January is the choose with heart. This would be used but the January is January and January believe. Which is the choose way is where all choose brings the choose of the no choose. But the January is digest is well it. The should be loved in at them, we won't working to a voice, and we must end a love. Have an invest mean, which was dropping about episode, which was not ren applied germ, but we need to do the deflet in the partably. The January node, which was the January and a deflet, which was not hurt in the no choose ever. Which was not ran applied gem, which was proved and many. Which was the January node, which was gem, which was we cut. Which was January and the pret, which was not hurt in the January. And what about episode, which was the tainted probably choose? Which was the January and the tret, which was the January and a flirt. Which was Gofton about episode, the January and the tret, which was the January and a flirt. Having ended des, the being able to January, which was Laughton for me. Which was the January and the tret, which was Gemant, and at last brings the choose with one of the partably in the end. Which was the January and the tret, which was Laughton for me. Which was the January and the tret, which was the January and a flirt. Which was the January and the tret, which was the January and a flirt. At what about episode? But letter as a forgery, procured by your man of business, Mr. Greaves, at the price of 20 guineas to the editor. The second thing you will write is a letter to the Lord Chairman of the Upper House, withdrawing in full clauses 2, 3, 8, and 11 of your enclosure bill, on the ground that the survey of 1796 has been found to contain marks that do not agree with the original ink. The third thing you will write is a personal note of apology to Sir Henry Carrick, Baronet, of Carrick House in Hertfordshire, for the misuse of his name in the public press. And if I will not, you will. And if I will not, Wexford. If you will not, Pembury, then I shall walk from this house this evening to the offices of the Morning Chronicle, and I shall lay before the editor those same 3 papers, and a 4th, which is a sworn affidavit from Mr. Coke at Lombard Street, as to the photographing of the original vow before it was paid. And I shall buy of the editor the leader for tomorrow morning's paper, and I shall publish all 4 together under my own name, signed Wexford. The Chronicle will then run it for 3 weeks. The lower house will be sitting on Friday. By Friday afternoon, the question of the enclosure bill will be the lesser of 2 questions in your name in the lower house. The first question will be your forgery. Your son is at Eton. Your daughter is to be presented next season. Your wife is in Mayfair on Wednesday evenings. Pembury closed his eyes.
You will not survive it either, Wexford. I shall survive it. The lady whose name is in this matter will survive it. Sir Henry Carrick will survive it. You will not survive it. Choose. The clock on the chimney-piece struck 4. Pembury took up his pen. "Send for the clerk," he said quietly to the man at the door. "And bring brandy. 2 glasses." "1 glass, Pembury." "As you wish." He wrote the 3 letters. He wrote them slowly, in a hand that did not quite hold steady, and he signed each one in front of the 2 witnesses Edmund had brought from Lincoln's Inn, and he handed each one across the desk to Edmund, without looking him in the face.
Edmund took the 3 letters, folded them into an inner pocket of his coat, and turned to the door. He paused.
You will not say in the papers that you came here yourself.
I shall not need to. The witnesses will say it. The clerk will say it. Your own steward at the door will say it. Good night, Pembury. We shall not meet at the club again. We shall not meet anywhere again. If your bill comes back to the upper house in any form, I shall publish the 4th paper that night. He went out. He went out through the panelled hall of Lord Pembury's house with his coat still on his arm and his hat in his hand, past the footman at the door, past the long case clock against the wainscot panelling, past the gilt mirror above the marble side table on which a calling card from the French ambassador had been left propped against a small silver bell. The 2 witnesses from Lincoln's Inn followed him at a discreet step behind. The footman, who had not been told what to do with any of them, held the door open and looked at the marble of the floor, and not at any face in the party. The cold air of Mayfair came in across the threshold and lifted the small white silk of the ambassador's card on the side table by half an inch. The night air on the Mayfair pavement was cold and smelled of coal smoke. He walked to the corner with the witnesses, dismissed them with thanks and the agreed fee, and walked alone to his agent's office in Lincoln's Inn, where he laid out the 3 letters and gave directions for the Courier and the Chronicle and the Gazette. And then he walked to a quiet inn off the Strand and ate the first meal he had eaten in 12 hours. And then he went up to a private room and wrote a letter. Genevieve, I am writing this from a room in London because I would not write it from Wexford. I have come from Lord Pembury's house in Mayfair. I came here this afternoon with the papers you assembled at the long table in the library, and with 1 further paper from my banker, which Pembury did not know existed. And I have left this house with 3 letters in his hand, a full retraction of the letter signed in your father's name in the Courier of the 2nd of November, a full withdrawal of the 4 clauses of the enclosure bill, and a personal apology to your father. The retraction will appear in the Courier of the morning after tomorrow. The withdrawal will be read in the upper house on Friday. The apology your father will receive at Hertfordshire by the 2nd post. He will not now know that there was ever any difficulty with his name. If he reads the Courier of the 2nd of November, the Courier of the 4th will already lie beside it. I have refused, in the matter of my marriage, the lady whom my aunt proposed to me as a means of containing the Courier letter. I refused her on Wednesday morning, before the news of your departure reached me, on the only ground on which a gentleman may refuse such a proposal: that I have given my heart elsewhere, and that I shall not marry a woman to whom I have not given it. I refused her before I knew you had gone. I should have refused her if I had known you had gone. I should refuse her if you tell me, on receipt of this letter, that you wish never to see me again. I have settled, this evening, the half of my Berkshire lands that lie beyond Weather Hill, upon the charity that was nearest my mother's heart in life, the Foundling Hospital at Reading. The settlement is signed and witnessed and irrevocable. I tell you this, not so that you should think me generous. I tell you, because I told my aunt, when she proposed that the Weather Hill lands should be Catherine Wexford's marriage portion, that I should rather give them to the Foundlings than buy a wife with them. The settlement is in token of that refusal. It is also, perhaps, in token of something else. The Weather Hill lands are the lands you walked me to on the 3rd morning after you came to my house, and the boundary stone you knelt to is on those lands, and I should rather those lands belonged to the parish my mother loved than to any inheritance I might make. I am writing all this so that you should not later wonder. I am writing it now because I am, on the road, a less honest man than I am at a writing table, and I cannot ride for 3 days to Yorkshire holding what I have to say to you in my mouth, and I cannot trust myself to say it at your cousin's door without first saying it on a sheet of paper. Genevieve, when the lilacs come out at Wexford in the 2nd week of May, I shall come up the North Road in my carriage and ask you a question I did not ask you in time. I should have asked it on the south parterre on the morning we walked. I should have asked it on the field at the foot of Weather Hill. I should have asked it the first night, by the lantern in the gravel, when I lifted you down from your father's carriage and you said your name to me as if to a stranger. I am asking it now in this letter. Will you marry me? I am asking it in this letter because if you say yes, I should like to come north this week, and not in May. The lilacs will come, whether I am at Wexford or in Yorkshire. I should rather be where you are. Edmund. He sealed the letter himself with a plain wafer, no seal, no crest. He addressed it to Miss Genevieve Carrick, in the care of Mrs. Thomas Allen, at Roughedale, near Skipton, Yorkshire. He gave it to the night post boy at the desk of the inn, with a half-sovereign for the speed, and he went up to his room, and he slept for the first time in 4 nights. In the morning, the inn-maid brought him hot water and his boots, cleaned, at his door, and the Courier of the Day, which carried in the 4th column of the 2nd page Lord Pembury's retraction over his own signature, set in a leaded box that the editor had plainly insisted on, and in the 3rd column of the 3rd page, the withdrawal of the 4 clauses of the enclosure bill. The Duke read both at the deal table by his window, with a cup of coffee at his elbow, and the bells of St. Bride's making the noon hour out over Fleet Street. He set down the coffee. He folded the Courier once, neatly, along its central crease. He paid his reckoning. He went to the coachyard in the Strand and hired a post-chaise to the north, and put 2 of his own grooms with it to ride change with the postboys, and he started for Yorkshire at 1 in the afternoon of the 4th of November. He drove through the short afternoon and through the short night, and changed horses 6 times before midnight, and slept 3 hours at an inn at Stamford on the 2nd night, and rode out before dawn on the 3rd day. The country gradually rose under the wheels. The hedges went over to stone walls. The villages went over from brick to grey-yellow limestone. The rivers ran shorter and faster in their beds. On the 3rd afternoon, he was through Doncaster and on the road to Skipton, with the moors of the West Riding on his left hand, and the long ridge of the high country going up against a sky the colour of cold pewter. And he saw, on the high hill above Skipton, the first dusting of snow he had seen that season. Only a fine white powder along the spine of the ridge, but enough to make him remember that he had once promised someone he would bring lilacs. 3 days later, on the morning of the 7th of November, Edmund Wexford turned the post-chaise into the yard of Roughedale Hall, which was a square white house at the foot of a steep grey fell, set behind a low stone wall, with a single old yew at the gate and a wet flagged path running to the door. He had ridden 400 miles in 4 days. He had not changed his linen in 2. He had Pembury's 3 retractions inside his coat. He had Lord Grey's note acknowledging the withdrawal of the 4 clauses of the enclosure bill in his pocket. He had Genevieve's reply to his letter, sent express from Roughedale the morning the letter arrived, folded inside his glove. The reply was 4 words. Come north, Genevieve. The wind off the high fell was edged with iron. The yard at Roughedale was paved in flat grey stones, and the stones were scoured clean by it, and a black sheepdog rose from the doorstep of a small outbuilding and considered the post-chaise with the unhurried care of a working dog who has decided to wait and see. A single old yew leaned at the gate, with its lower branches sheared off to the height of a man on horseback. Beyond the wall of the yard, the fell rose almost at once, very steep, very pale, with a long grey scarp of limestone half a mile up its face, and the thin first dusting of November snow lying along the ridge. The house itself was 3 stories of plain limestone, with a slate roof and 4 chimneys, set square to the wind, with the wisteria of last summer cut back hard along the south wall, and a small bed of late Michaelmas daisies under the parlour window, pale violet, picked out against the grey stone, the only colour in the yard. The lamps inside the parlour window were lit, although it was scarcely an hour past noon, and behind the lower pane, Edmund saw a slip of pale yellow that he understood, in the half-second before he understood it consciously, to be the corner of a russet wool gown. He climbed down at the gate. Mrs. Allen, a small, spare woman of 50, in a plain, dark gown, opened the door herself. She is in the drawing-room. She has been at the window since first light. I told her you would not be on the road before midday, and she would not have it. Go in, Your Grace. The maid will see to the horses. He went in. Genevieve was at the window. She wore a morning gown of soft russet wool, the same plain gown she had been wearing the first morning he had seen her at Wexford. Her hair was done up simply.
The light fell across her face from a north window and made it grave and very steady. She did not move when she heard the door open. "Will you sit down? You have ridden a long way." "I shall sit down in a moment. May I—" "Yes." "May I cross the room first?" "Yes." He crossed the room. He did not take her into his arms. He stopped one pace from her. She turned from the window. She looked at him without speaking, and her grey eyes had in them the same brightness of held water he had seen on the south parterre at Wexford. And now the water did not hold. One tear ran down her face, and she did not lift her hand to it. "Genevieve, I have brought the courier retraction. I have brought Lord Grey's note. I have brought your father's apology. I have brought the deed of settlement on the Weatherhill lands. I have brought your father's old vowel, what was left of it. My banker had photographed it before it was paid, and the photograph is yours. I have brought everything that was in the letter. I know. I have come to ask you again, in this room, the question that was in the letter. I know. Genevieve. Yes. Yes? Yes, the answer is yes. I told you in 4 words in the letter from Roughedale. I shall tell you in 1 word now. Yes. Genevieve. Edmund, there is one condition. There was one condition. In the letter you wrote me at Roughedale, you said, you have not said it, but I know you mean it. There was a condition. Will you say it now? She drew a slow breath. I shall not give up my work, Edmund. The work on the boundary stones, the work on the surveys, the work on the bill. I shall not be a wife who sits in a window with a piece of needlework she did not choose. I shall write. I shall write, perhaps, under my own name, perhaps not. But I shall write. If I am Duchess of Wexford in May, I shall be Duchess of Wexford with a pen and an inkstand, and the right to be at your library table in the evening with my own papers. I shall not be the Duchess your aunt thinks I should be. I shall not. Edmund, I shall not give it up. Genevieve. Yes? You will not give it up. You will not be required to give it up. You will have your own papers on the library table. You will have your own name on the cover of any pamphlet you choose to write. You will sit in the small drawing room with Lord Grey when he comes to dinner, and you will tell him in your own words what is wrong with the next enclosure bill, because by the next enclosure bill, I shall be married to a woman who knows more about the boundary stones of this county than I do, and I shall be very glad to step back from the dispatch box and let her brief me from the floor. Do I make myself plain? You make yourself very plain, Edmund. Good. He took her hand. He pressed his mouth, once, briefly, with a great deal of held care, to the inside of her wrist, where her glove had not yet been put on. There is one condition of my own, he said. Name it. You will come back to Wexford with me in March. We shall walk again to the boundary stone by the gate on the village road. We shall walk it the 2nd week of May, with the lilacs out. We shall be married in the parish church. Mrs. Linley will dress your hair. My aunt will give you away, because your father will be too ill to walk, and your father will give his blessing from Hertfordshire by letter, and the parish will be at the wedding because the parish, by the 2nd week of May, will know what you did with the boundary stone on the 3rd morning of November. Yes, Edmund. And after the wedding, we shall walk down to the Foundling Hospital at Reading and have tea with the matron, because the Weatherhill lands are the Foundlings now, and I should like the matron to meet you. She is a sensible woman. You will like each other. Yes, Edmund. And then we shall come home, to Wexford, to your library table and your inkstand, and the small fire in the south library that I lit the first night you came, when I could not read a page. I shall read all my pages from now on, Genevieve, with you at the other end of the table, with your pen on its own work. Yes, Edmund. He looked at her for a long moment. He bent his head and rested his forehead against hers, and stood so for 1 breath, 2, 3.
And then he stepped back and offered her his arm.
Mrs. Allen will be on the other side of the door with a tea tray. We must not keep her. I have ridden 4 days. I should like a cup of tea.
Mrs. Allen will not be on the other side of the door, Edmund. Will she not? She is in the kitchen, putting on the kettle. She has known since the post brought your letter what would happen this morning. She gave me an hour. We have a little more than half of it left.
Genevieve.
Yes.
Half an hour will do. She smiled, the first true smile he had seen from her, and she put her hand into his arm, and they went together to the small fire by the window where the north light came in cold and clean across the fells. And they sat down on the settle, and for half an hour they spoke of small things: the chestnut mare at Wexford, the parish church at Wethercombe-Spinney, the foundling matron, the colour of the lilacs in the second week of May. And they did not, for that half hour, speak of Pembury, or the courier, or the broker's letter, or the long carriage in the dark of the first night, because all of that was behind them, and the road home, in March, lay open in front of them. The lilacs at Wexford did not come out in the second week of May. They came out in the third, after a cold spring and a late frost. By then, Genevieve Carrick was Duchess of Wexford, and the parish church at Wethercombe-Spinney had been full to the doors for the wedding, and the cottages by the brook had pinned green sprigs to their hats for the bride, and Mrs. Linley had dressed her hair, and the Dowager Lady Margaret had given her away in a gown of soft grey silk, and Sir Henry Carrick had sent his blessing from Hertfordshire by letter, and a small brass letter-opener which had been his wife's, and Catherine Wexford, in Bath, had married a sensible young clergyman of her own choosing a fortnight later, and Lord Pembury had taken his family to the Continent for an extended tour, and had not, as the Dowager had predicted, spoken in the upper house since. On a warm afternoon, at the end of the third week of May, with the lilac in full bloom along the south wall of the south parterre, and the first roses opening on the lower terrace, and the lake at the foot of the lawn brown and bright with mayfly, the Duchess of Wexford sat at the long table in the south library, with a folio of plans open before her, the survey of Lord Pembury's neighbour's enclosure bill, which would come before the upper house in the autumn session, and a sheet of foolscap at her elbow, and an inkstand beside her right hand, and the small brass letter-opener her father had sent her laid across the foolscap. Edmund Wexford came in by the small door from the parterre, with the sun on his shoulders, and a sealed letter from the Lord Chancellor in one hand, and a sprig of white lilac in the other. He laid the letter on the corner of her table. He laid the lilac on the open folio of the survey, in the southeast corner of the field below the spinney, where, in another season, a pencil mark had stood. She looked up at him over the lilac and smiled. He has acknowledged the brief. He has asked for the second reading to be deferred a fortnight, to allow the new survey to be examined by the upper house's own clerk. Then we have our fortnight. We have our fortnight. She rested her hand on the edge of her writing table.